There's a common misconception when looking back at history to assume that everything just inevitably marches forward from A to B to C, when in reality people and their decisions trigger events that branch out with infinite possibilities. There were choices that led to others that eventually led us to where we are today, but also some that seemed to end with seemingly little impact. Sometimes those nubs are forgotten, in fact most are, but rarely something that was once forgotten can end up making an unexpected impact. A relevant 20th century example is Jack Northup's vision of a flying wing aircraft that could maximize efficiency, reduce drag, and present a completely unique look for modern aircraft. Though prototypes for his design flew and the technology was getting there, technical issues along with a fatal crash in 1948 forced the designs into the shadows for roughly 30 years. It wasn't until some of those technical issues were solved with new technologies that the plans for the flying wing aircraft were given another look in the 1970s and 1980s. Northrup's designs were the basis for a cutting-edge stealth design that would eventually become the Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. It was a branch that had finally grown and blossomed. The DVS Devastator project represented a branch in BattleTech design which was overrun by events that ended up setting the inner sphere ablaze. Through no fault of its own, this 100-ton BattleTech had to wait for technology and the industrial will to see production. It's a bit of a wild ride, so I hope you can stick around for it. The Devastator on Victor's left did not contribute its fire to killing the Massacari or the Cauldronborn, but instead targeted one of the Stormcrows coming around to the north. The Gauss rifle in each arm spat out silver projectiles that streaked across the scarlet landscape and smashed into the Stormcrow's left arm. The first shattered the armor and the second carried the limb off. When the arm hit the ground, the heavy autocannon in it exploded, spraying shells everywhere. The Devastator's twin torso-mounted PPCs then stabbed forks of cobalt lightning into the Stormcrow's right flank and left leg, obliterating armor. Victor keyed his radio. "Nice shooting, Jerry. Devastator's a nice change from that old thing you used to drive, isn't it?" "No complaints here, boss." Prince of Havoc by Michael A. Stackpole. Just an hour into the Operation Liberation assault on Terra on January 30th of 2777, General Kerensky paced on the bridge of his command ship, the SLS McKenna's Pride. Arriving at this point, with hundreds of fighters, dropships, and warships participating in the effort to crack the usurper Amaris's defenses, had taken the lives of countless good men and women. All of that weighed on the general as the entire effort danced on the knife's edge. The initial landings of SLDF forces were scattered across the Eurasian continents in an effort to cut Amaris off from the heavy industry that could reinforce the defenders in North America. The noose was tightening, and Stefan Amaris's realm now measured in square kilometers instead of light years. Included among the SLDF forces in the desperate gamble to retake Terra were 6 100-ton BattleTech prototypes that had just been delivered by the design team. Designated the DVS-2 Devastator, this mech carried the latest and greatest in Starleague technology. Had it been ready just a few years earlier, it could have made a significant difference in the war. As of the production of this video, there was only one record of the Devastator's performance in the last days of the conflict, at least one that I could find. Lieutenant Peter St. Ives of the 146th Royal BattleTech Regiment was piloting one of those prototype Devastators during the fighting near Alberta in the assault on North America. Lumbering into the fray, St. Ives was swarmed by 4 BattleTechs from Amaris's 17th Dragoons, and it was in a tough spot. The SLDF Mechwarrior kept his cool and began to back the Devastator away, firing his heavy weapons in succession, which ended up picking apart his attackers one after the other. In just a few minutes, 3 Dragoon battlemechs were left smoldering wreckage, while the 4th shut down his battlemech and surrendered. The fate of the prototype Devastators remains unknown, but we do know that the plans and presumably at least one of the Devastator prototypes survived and was taken away with Kerensky's Exodus fleet into the deep periphery. Another set of plans was ferreted away to an SLDF base on the planet Hoth. We'll get to that later. But what made this battlemech any different from the plethora of other Star League technology lost with humanity's descent into the horrors of the First Succession War? Constructed from a Star League XU spec chassis wrapped around a 300 Vlar extra-light fusion engine, the goal of the Devastator was to create an extremely powerful assault mech which could deliver ordnance at the longest distance possible. While the extra-light engine introduced vulnerability over an alternative like the 100-ton Atlas, it was reasoned that the Devastator would have an edge in being able to smash through an opponent long before its own armor was breached. Speaking of armor, 18.5 tons of Duralex standard plate armor were added to the Devastator to give it almost 300 points of protection from incoming fire. For comparison, the noble AS-7D Atlas carried 19 tons of standard plate, and the venerable KGC Quad Zero King Crab sported 17 tons. The closest comparison with a 100-ton mech sporting an XL engine is the PLG-3Z Pillager, which was protected by 19.5 tons. With 6 tons of gyro and cockpit installed, including the Randar Pinpoint HY targeting and tracking system, that left heatsinks and the mech's weapons loadout. The original DV-S2 carried 14 double heatsinks in service of some pretty heavy-hitting additions. The inclusion of a searchlight and arms with hyperextending actuators meant the Devastator was equipped to excel in a variety of circumstances. The heaviest hitters on the Devastator were the paired Poland main Model A Gauss rifles split between the arms. Each rifle had its own dedicated 2 tons of ammunition, which was deemed acceptable for most short and mid-tier engagements. The 14 double heatsinks served the 2 Donnell particle projection cannons split between the side torsos, which added to the volume of fire considerably. For those close-range squabbles, 4 standard Intech medium lasers were set into the mech's side torsos, head, and center torso, with the center torso laser facing the rear firing arc. That seemed like the least that could be done to protect the mech from fast movers when it only had a top speed of 54 kilometers per hour. In one report, there was an erroneous comment about the battlemech having 2 battle fists with which it could pummel enemies that got too close, but those who saw the Devastator in action could plainly see there were no hand actuators. Good times. It's claimed that General Kerensky himself laid out the specs for the Devastator, intending to let its 4 primary weapons hit at great distances to make up for the mech's lack of mobility and vulnerability. The 14 double heatsinks were adequate to keep the mech running and gunning at long range without any issue, though it was possible to overheat the DVS-2 once the medium lasers came into play. However, even alpha striking with the forward-facing weapons while on the run left the Devastator at a very reasonable heat. The final product was an obviously powerful battlemech that could work through most opponents quickly. At that point, Rakisha could no longer pay attention. She had her own fight to worry about. The Devastator, though distant, loomed large on her screen. It was a mech of the same design school as her Lament, but even more powerful. Her advantage lay in speed, by comparison at least, and initiative. Rather than wait, Rakisha fired her PPCs and began a zigzag closing pattern. The Azure bolts struck true, but the assault machine shrugged them off, seeming to lose little more than paint. The return fire from the Devastator lived up to its name. It fired its own PPCs, the energy crackling through the air like lightning, pairing it with a double shot from its Gauss rifles. Picking the Bones, Shrapnel number 15, by Alan Brundage. The dream of lances of Devastators joining the other lumbering death machines in battle would have to wait. The collapse of the Star League and the horrors of the First and Second Succession War had tossed technologies like XL engines, double heatsinks, and Gauss rifles into the dustbin of history. The Devastator would have to wait several centuries before it could start to terrorize the inner sphere. Meanwhile, out in the deep periphery, the plans to create a refuge for humanity were on the brink of disaster. The Pentagon worlds descended into infighting, and it seemed that the SLDF Exodus fleet had simply imported all of the same factionalism and pride which had triggered the First Succession War. In preparation for a return to the Pentagon worlds with Operation Klondike, the clans pulled out all the stops with promising new technology, including battlemechs armed with weapons never before seen. The plans for the Devastator were brushed off, and a small number were produced with some new bells and whistles. The Devastator EC that debuted in 2827 looked a lot like the original, but this advanced design carried some serious punch. The standard structure, XL engine, and 18.5 tons of standard plate were maintained, but the double heat sinks were upgraded to meet the new clan spec. The total number was also increased to 20, offering a substantial 40 cooling capacity. The twin Gauss rifles were upgraded to the improved Gauss rifle, which did the same 15 damage out to 22 hexes but weighed 13 tons and filled 6 criticals. Saving 2 tons of mass with each rifle explained where they found room for more heat sinks. The 2 PPCs were upgraded to the enhanced form, which made them more powerful at 12 damage per shot and improved their range to the clan ERPPC 714-23 range profile. The fun continued with the removal of the standard medium lasers in favor of just 2 clan spec ER medium lasers split between the side torsos. Going from 4 lasers to 2 is where the last 2 tons were found to bring the total heatsink count to 20. Now before you rush to the comments to yell at me, we do have to make the distinction here because the Devastator that was used in Operation Klondike was not what officially became known as the EC variant. The Klondike Devastator did carry an improved Gauss rifle, but not the enhanced ERPPCs or ER medium lasers. It was a half step between the original and the EC. Only after Klondike did Clan Wolverine scientists finish the upgrade that we just covered. There, no yelling at me, alright? At least not for this. General Lester J. Otto knew he faced death. His new Devastator gave him little comfort, for he knew he sat in his own coffin. Still, he was a soldier and refused to die like a badger trapped in its burrow. If he had to go, he would take Marcus Barton with him. From Otto's Last Stand, May 14th, 3044, McCarran's Armored Cavalry Sourcebook. Returning to the Inner Sphere, the Devastator story would not pick up again until 3023, when a House Davion unit stumbled upon the blueprints for the 100-ton battlemech within an old Star League facility on the planet Hoth, which is found near the Davion Combine border. Though intriguing, it was quickly clear that the design was beyond the technological capability of any of the mech producers at the time. Without XL engines, double heat sinks, and Gauss rifles, big compromises had to be made to bring the design to life. Of course, that didn't keep the fine folks at the New Avalon Institute of Science from trying anyway. The resulting DVS-1D that was produced in very limited numbers starting in 3036 was a pale imitation of the original. While the Devastator 1D maintained its 350 movement profile and it carried 18 tons of standard plate armor, the standard engine significantly cut down on the mass available for weapons and heat sinks. Just 15 single heat sinks were crammed into the mech, which was far fewer than what was needed, even with its downgraded weapons. Without Gauss rifles, the arm ballistics were replaced with a pair of AC-10 autocannons with 2 tons of ammunition stored in each arm to keep the explodey bits as far from the core of the mech as possible. The side torso PPCs had to be swapped for large lasers, though without the heat sinks to keep the mech cool enough, it hardly mattered. Finally, the 4 standard medium lasers were retained, including the one facing the rear firing arc. As far as Succession Wars downgrades go, this was a painful one. Thankfully, there weren't that many out there, and it wasn't long before Star League technology was rediscovered with the Helm Memory Core. The existing Devastator 1Ds out there were shipped off to militia units or ended up in the hands of the Taurian Concordat. Their numbers could be counted in the dozens, not hundreds. One notable DVS-1D Mechwarrior was Griff Storm, who served in the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces early on in his career, but then started his own mercenary company named Storm's Metal Thunder in 3024. Using a network of connections in the Lyran military apparatus, Storm was able to secure choice mercenary contracts, and he became a minor celebrity after a rescue mission returned hundreds of Lyran citizens from Butte Hold, where they were being held by the notorious Red Jack Ryan. Colonel Storm was instrumental in locating the Star League-era Norse Storm facilities where the Devastator plans were rediscovered. Intimately involved in the process of bringing the mech back online, Storm was able to secure a garrison contract on Loxley, as well as obtain one of the first NAIS-developed DVS-1D Devastators as his personal battle mech. Though he could have later upgraded to the DVS-2 model, for whatever reason he declined. I guess some people really enjoy AC-10s and overheating. Griff Storm's skill at networking and obtaining choice contracts for his unit did eventually get him into trouble on Kikuyu in 3064 when the Jade Falcons threw a wrench into the works by slaughtering Storm's Metal Thunder, including Griff, who was the last one standing in his DVS-1D. Thankfully, the Merc unit's dependents and support staff were able to escape the Falcons' wrath. Cranston was in trouble, soaking up the concentrated barrage that had been meant for Victor. Unable to hold up, his Devastator toppled slowly to the left, collapsing on a small dune. Immediately, Cranston worked to right his machine and get it back on its feet. "I believe we've finally worn out our welcome," he said, a wince of pain in his voice. Riding 100 tons of metal and myomer to the ground was never a pleasant experience. Storms of Fate by Lauren L. Coleman. With the Helm Memory Core rediscovery of Star League technology, the DVS-2 Devastator could finally get into the fun and intersphere interstellar disagreements. North Storm Battlemechs Incorporated set up production lines on Loxley, and the mech was quickly shipped to Federated Commonwealth units. The Devastator became a mainstay of those FedCom units, particularly in command lances, where they were frequently given the role of a personal bodyguard battlemech. Unsurprisingly, when the Federated Commonwealth descended into a brutal civil war, access to mechs like the Devastator became part of the larger fight. Archon Catherine Steiner Davion intervened and prevented shipments of the mech from reaching Davion space following the secession in 3057. Those Devastators went to units loyal to her and bolstered her side of the fight. In 3058, North Storm sought to tweak the design with the introduction of the DVS-3 variant, which shed 3 of the standard medium lasers in favor of 2 additional tons of Gauss rifle ammunition, another half-ton of armor, and a rear-facing security blanket small laser. While this did improve the Devastator's ability to persist as a major threat on the battlefield, it is reported that there was little enthusiasm for the build. I'd be curious to know if it was a lack of excitement among mech warriors and commanders, or that of logistics officers always looking to pinch a C-bill and save money on ammunition. Thankfully for the Devastator, North Storm Battlemechs Incorporated weathered the storm of the FedCom Civil War, and when the smoke cleared, Archon Peter Steiner Davion was reported to have placed a sizable order to rebuild depleted units. The battlemech would live on, even if the Federated Commonwealth was over. Interesting to note that 3058 was a banner year for North Storm. As they continued to ramp up production of the Devastator, they also produced another old Star League design, the Thunderhawk, which was also 100 tons and carried 3 Gauss rifles. It may have to get a video someday soon. We'll see, it's a spicy one. Wow, 40 years ago, the Alliance made quite a hoopla, yes sirree. After succeeding with the Hatchet Man, NAIS and Defiance Industries went as big as possible. The Alliance was supposed to out-Atlas the Atlas. I never thought the Atlas was all that, but I guess in 3025, when all the Devastators and Thunderhawks were extinct and your only competition came from rotting relic pillagers, then you got to call yourselves King of Kings. The Alliance was going to dethrone that king. 021, Shrapnel number 21, by Lance Scarinci. Over the years, Norse as well as the NAIS looked at possible tweaks and improvements that could make the Devastator design a little bit better. While few ideas ever seemed good enough to put in the effort, there was one research assistant named John Heidel who postulated that maybe they were thinking too small. The quote recorded was, "What if we put the biggest engine possible in there and slapped a supercharger on it?" Instead of being immediately dismissed as an incredibly expensive idea, the rest of the team at Korean Enterprises decided that it was not only a worthwhile idea, but one that could be just the start of a massive overhaul and technological smorgasbord. Starting with an endo-composite frame wrapped around a massive 400 extra light fusion engine, already I'm hearing cash register noises. The 460 movement profile was bolstered by a right torso supercharger and a left torso mask system, which could temporarily boost run speed to 410 if the Mechwarrior felt bold and lucky. The compact and armored gyro weighed in at 7 tons, and the entire mech was wrapped in 19.5 tons of reactive armor, which provided additional protection from missile and artillery attacks. The last of the structural additions was the inclusion of 16 double heatsinks to keep it all from shutting down after the fight starts, though that wasn't easy. All of this technology was in service to moving 2 heavy PPCs downfield into range. Each of them were further bolstered by PPC capacitors, which, when charged, could add 5 additional damage to the shot in exchange for 5 additional heat. For close-range scraps, 2 medium variable speed pulse lasers in the center torso could offer their warm embrace. The DVS X-10 Devastator, sometimes referred to as Muse Earth, the name of the project, was undoubtedly a speedy and dangerous design. Taking a 1-2 punch from those capacitor-boosted heavy PPCs would be sure to leave a mark. However, the design was incredibly fragile and expensive thanks to that XXL engine and inability to fire both PPCs with the capacitors charged and not suffer movement and accuracy penalties due to the generated heat. If we go by the Megamech estimator, the total market price for one DVS X10, ignoring all the research and development costs, was a whopping 131.5 million C-bills. While it was obviously never destined for full production, the DVS X10 proved to be an interesting attempt to push the 100-ton battlemech speed to its outer limits. During its first test run, the Mechwarrior, Katie Rapinski, engaged both the mask and the supercharger, which must have been quite the sight to see, with a massive mech moving just over 100 kilometers per hour. Despite her misgivings, she did like the 10-meter-tall, broad-shouldered battlemech. Its lack of hands didn't bother her a bit, but since both arms ended in the muzzles of Gauss rifles, she overlooked that defect. Particle projection cannons were mounted on both sides of its chest, right below medium lasers. The mech's other 2 medium lasers were mounted in the head and right over the mech's spine, allowing her to shoot easily at targets to her rear. The humanoid mech also packed a lot of armor, so not only could it hit hard at long range, but it could survive an extended firefight. She felt pretty certain that the firefight that was coming wouldn't be very long in duration, but it will make up in savagery what it lacks in length. Grave Covenant by Michael A. Stackpole. Even though the DVS-10X project was not destined for production, elements of the research did manifest themselves in the Devastator DVS-10, which did get the green light for production runs completing in 3142. The endocomposite frame wrapped around a 400 extra light fusion engine and compact gyro bought extra space for the 16.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor. Both mask and the supercharger made their way into the mech's latest iteration, which matched the 10X project's 410-0 movement profile when and if the Mechwarrior was in a pinch. For cooling purposes and presumably to fund the retirement of some heatsink subcontractors, 18 double heatsinks were installed. With all the structural bells and whistles on the DVS-10 to facilitate it in getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible, that left only 14 tons of mass to devote to weaponry. It was spent on a pair of large re-engineered lasers split between the arms and 2 medium re-engineered lasers set into the center torso. If you're doing the math, you might be a little worried that this all added up to just 30 total damage, with 12 of that only reliably accurate at close range. Your concerns are well-founded, as the first Davion units to accept delivery from Korean enterprises on Augusta were dismayed that the battlemech that had been known to be a powerhouse at long range was now unable to return fire until it could close to mid or short range. Somehow, the always dangerous Devastator had been reimagined as a niche mimic of the Charger, which itself was rarely appreciated. Needless to say, the feedback was overwhelmingly negative, and the engineering team at Korean had to get back to work to fix the problem. Jerry Cranston's Devastator unloaded on its target. The Gauss rifle projectiles slammed into the mech's right leg and flank, shattering all of the armor there. The shot to the flank even dented the mech's frame. Of the PPCs, only one hit, but its cerulean lightning played out over the Stormcrow's head. Armor exploded and the cockpit canopy burst apart, trailing black smoke from where the pilot had once sat. The Stormcrow pitched forward, scattering bones before it as it skidded to a halt. Prince of Havoc by Michael A. Stackpole. A few years later, in 3146, the Korean Enterprises team took another bite at the apple with the DVS-11 variant. While many of the structural components from the DVS-10 were preserved, including the endocomposite frame, mask, supercharger, and compact gyro, the armor coverage was returned to 18.5 tons of standard plate. The engine size was dropped to a 300XL, which returned the mech to a more traditional 350 movement, unless the mask or supercharger was engaged. The extra double heat sinks were also dropped to just 12, which were all contained within the engine. This tinkering left 26 tons of mass for things that went boom or zap, which they would, often, whether you wanted them to or not. The Korean team now knew what the customers wanted, so they brought back the venerable twin Gauss rifles to the Devastator 11's arms, each able to feed from 2 tons of ammunition. This time, however, the traditional PPCs would be swapped out for the snub-nosed variety, which reduced their DPS at range but made up for it with an advantageous range profile and potency at short range. As if to make up for their previous attempt to shortchange the Mechwarriors, 2 clan-spec ER medium lasers were split between the side torsos. Their potent 7 damage out to 15 hexes made the Devastator much more dangerous in the mid-range. Finally, because they're adorable, 2 clan-spec ER small lasers were added, one into the head critical location and the other in the center torso, facing that rear-firing arc. The DVS-11 Devastator had finally returned to form. This time, the advanced technology enhanced the original purpose of the design, as well as making it much more maneuverable as a bonus. While it did still face some challenges with that vulnerable XL engine and requiring some heat management in the thick of the fight, the Mechwarriors who piloted the DVS-11 were very happy campers. In fact, when the showrunners at Norse Storm saw what the Korean had done with the Devastator, they sent word to open up talks for a licensing agreement. Its feet planted firmly in the loamy ground, the Devastator became a fixed weapons platform, towering some 10 meters over the hillock where it stood. David thrust forward the 2 Gauss rifle barrels that served his humanoid mech for arms. His targeting crosshairs burned from red to gold as they dropped over the computer-imaged silhouette of the Mad Cat, only to be jogged aside as the Devastator took a hard-hitting flank strike from a Jaguar warrior farther down the line. Energy poured into his mech's left leg and armor melted off the side, splattering molten fire against the dark earth. David tied his particle projection cannon into his main trigger, fighting to reacquire target lock and then jerking into a hasty shot. 1 Gauss slug streaked toward the enemy mech, the rail-propelled device smashing armor into impotent shards and opening a wound that his PPCs could exploit as their man-made lightning whipped across the Mad Cat like some god's scourge. Flashpoint by Lauren L. Coleman. Now, there was no way in heck that I was going to pass up the opportunity to come up with my own totally non-canon and unofficial MF configuration for the Devastator. It aches for a little more fire and fury, and I'm gonna give it. Using the DVS-11 as the platform, I changed little from the core of the mech besides removing the mask system. While the speed boost can be fun and quite useful, I needed the tonnage for other things. The MF still had a 350 movement profile, but the supercharger in the side torso could still push that run speed to 6 if advantageous. The other hardware change included 14 double heat sinks, and the original 18.5 tons of standard plate was still there. That left the remaining mass on the mech for weaponry, which will look familiar to the inspiring BattleMech. 2 Gauss rifles split between the arms remain untouched, along with a total of 4 tons of ammunition. However, these snub-nosed PPCs had to be sacrificed on the altar of Big Plasma, with 2 of the rifles replacing them in their side torsos. The rifles can feed from 4 tons of ammunition, which is 20 shots per rifle for the uninitiated. The 2 clan-spec ER medium lasers were left in the side torsos, polishing off the build. Sorry, no rear-facing emotional support small laser. Maybe next time. With 14 double heat sinks, heat generation isn't much of an issue unless consistently alpha striking while on the run. The overall damage potential is as substantial as the original DVS-2, with the added benefit of the plasma rifle's target heat generation, which could really annoy some of the min-maxers out there who like to ride the heat curves in a perfect build. If you'd like to give the Devastator 11 MF a try, I've included the PDF record sheet and Alpha Strike card in a free link down in the video notes below. Check it out and let me know how it performs. Guards, you are clear to fire. Wendy dropped her crosshairs onto the outline of a Kodiak. She had no idea if it was the one she'd seen before, and she realized she didn't care if it was or not. The second a gold dot pulsed at the center of her crosshairs, she tightened up on her triggers, firing the Devastator's twin Gauss rifles. 2 silvery balls shot out from the rifle muzzles and nailed the Kodiak. Each supersonic slug hit on the left side of the clan mech. One shivered a ton of armor from the left arm, while the other reduced the armor over its shin to crumbling flakes. The twin impact twisted the mech to the left, and for a moment Wendy thought it might go down, but the pilot proved skillful enough to keep the machine upright. Grave Covenant by Michael A. Stackpole. So why do we love the Devastator? While it would be easy to just answer big guns and call it a day, my personal admiration for the mech stems from its backstory. The fluff makes a difference, and the twists and turns that the Devastator had to go through to reach the battlefields of the Inner Sphere help it move to my list of personal favorites. History may not always march in a direction from A to B to C, and that's okay because sometimes it veers off on a tangent and we get ourselves a Devastator. It may not be the prettiest or most stylish battle mech, but it has a certain gravitas to it that makes it a hidden gem, often overshadowed by mechs like the Atlas and Marauder II. If you're running a campaign during the clan invasion years, up to the FedCom Civil War and even beyond, give the Devastator a try. Thanks as always for coming out today. If you think the video deserves it and you want to show your support, the easiest way to do that is to hit the like button, subscribe, and even leave a comment. All of these things make the YouTube algorithm happy. If you want to go one step further, direct support through Ko-fi is ideal, and the link is down in the video notes below. Though YouTube channel memberships are still a thing, it's nice not to have to rely entirely on Google's good graces moving forward. No matter what, it is appreciated. Without strong community support, this would not be possible. If you'd like to join the nonsense and even share your own painted battle mechs and even see them in a video, join our Discord server where people get the heads up about what's coming up next week and have a chance to chat about all things BattleTech. With that, I'll say thanks again. Please go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.